Hello and welcome back to the cybernetic communism conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. I think I'll do a thing that I should do very often and say that I took this name some years ago before I had begun to make any real study of the kinds of works, such as those to do with scientific communism and related disciplines, would allow me to articulate a 21st century applied cybernetic communist program, such as that of the People's Superintelligence, which I'll discuss at more length momentarily. And so I took it in a time when I had a desire to articulate some techno-utopian outcome, but not really the body of knowledge or real inclination to do so. And at that time I had a more favorable view of this Western world, the Eurocentric paradigm, the Judeo-Christian tradition. Can kind of use these things interchangeably almost than I do today. And so since say 2022, when I really started to work on a set of cybernetic communist projects, I considered taking another name. But I'm hard pressed to think of a better name that's suggestive of this than a voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological New Jerusalem. I'm kind of limited to the fact that I speak a language which has a lot of this kind of Judeo-Christian business baked into it. And that language is quite prevalent in this world at large, so I haven't come up with something better. I'm not a person who comes who's engaged in their life with this form of God belief called Judaism. Not ever for a moment. Not ever for a moment have I engaged with this form of God belief called Christianism. And I haven't really known that many people in the former category, such that I would say that I have some other strong cultural connection to this form of God belief called Judaism. Unfortunately, in my very early life, I had a connection to Christian fascists who can eat shit and die, but never at the age of mental maturity has that really been an influence in my life. But that's not what I'm actually going to talk about in this conversation. This is kind of a follow-up / companion piece to a presentation that I did maybe 36 hours ago, in which I posted directly to the AI philosophy group. And basically half of my notes were cut off. And so I didn't quite say the main thing, one of the main things that I wanted to say. But rather than post that to the AI philosophy group, because I'm a proletarian philosopher who's trying to wrap their head around advanced computing and systems theory at scale. But there are people in that group, or people in these circles, who are computer scientists of long standing. So it's not my desire to post to there twice in a row in as many days. It seems just kind of like a favor to me almost that I'm allowed to post live videos in that group at all. I guess I'll also talk about a little bit about a video that I watched this morning. But before I do that, I'm going to go over a bunch of the works that I've been reading recently, and Basically all of them are to do with scientific communism and I guess you could say to some degree cybernetic communism and the related the many related subfields that kind of span serious thought fall short of those two. So most recently I've been reading a book called The Politics of Language and Nationalism in Modern Central Europe, which is a fascinating look at the subject of linguistics and political philosophy, subjects that have had some role in my life. Quite recently I went back and reread a book about some lunatics called Neo-Reaction, a Basilisk, Essays on and Around the Alt-Right by Elizabeth Sandifer. And the reason that I reread this book is not because it's so good. It kind of trades in some anti-communist tropes, but it has a pretty good analysis of the, in a word, problematic accelerationism. But the reason I'm rereading it is because I didn't read like half of the essays when I first read it. So I reread the whole thing. Let's see. So some books on this list are books that I'm about to read but haven't read yet. Which is the other one? Well, the reason that I brought up the subject of book, this is another good one that I read recently. It gave me a better understanding of the American Indian movement, even though I have told people in the past that I've read almost everything that had been written by political philosophers who were involved in the American Indian movement. So I read most of Ward Churchill's books and a number of others, all of Leonard Peltier's long-form works and so forth. But I hadn't read the autobiography of a founder, essentially the founder, sort of the Huey P. Newton of the American Indian movement, Dennis Banks. So I read his autobiography, which is very, very good, and I highly recommend that. But the reason that I brought up the subject of books that I read recently is because I watched a video from the godfather of artificial superintelligence, a person who I've had occasion to meet on a few occasions, and at the risk of overstating it, at a certain time, before 2022, when I was a serious person, was in a position to develop a working relationship with, and I shit the bed. I also was still connected to this person on social media until like a year ago, because I always watch this person's videos. Unless it's a repetition of a video that I've already seen. So every few months I'll kind of see what's on their mind. This person, the godfather of artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence, is Ben Goertzel. And I am not hesitant to give him that title because other people who would be competing for those titles, many of whom might be deceased, so it's not as relevant, I guess. Other people who are competing for those titles are people more firmly in a bourgeois accelerationist or bourgeois technocrat kind of position than him. So Ben Goertzel has been working not just as a computer scientist or academic for many years, but has been working pretty particularly, before I had even ever conceived of such a thing, on building something that would be a close analog to the people's superintelligence. Now, Ben Goertzel doesn't drop a lot of hints suggesting that he has a real strong interest in proletarian philosophy, and that's a problem. But there's only like 20 public-facing people in the whole world who we would say would be 95% or more the way to being a cybernetic communist. And this happens to be a person who fits that description, who I had met and had some passing connection to. The response to this video would be talking about. It's all whenever I'm talking about this, I'm almost always talking about where we are in this AI, the curve of this AI takeoff, and that's what we're talking about in the first part of this show today. Ben Goertzel would be somebody who we would describe as maybe the left contingent of a Kurzweilian cadre, which is not much of a cadre at all. But nevertheless, these singulatarians are people who pretty uniformly want to use advanced computing to build a better world. So the fact that most of them don't equate ending the exploitation of man by man and a deep understanding of that, proletarian philosophy, things like Marxist-Leninism, and things to do with the abolition of private wealth as being essential to their project, would tend to make their rhetoric about building a better world quite hollow. That's kind of the definition of liberal, right? Liberal is somebody who wants to do good things, but they're incapable of doing good things because their allegiances are to capital rather than workers. Now I misplaced my notes. It's not suitable. Okay. Let's see if we can get this going again here. Being the leftmost major actor in that bourgeois singularitarian phalanx is interesting, but it's only interesting if that person builds something like a people's superintelligence that then transitions into something of a more proletarian function. So Ben Goertzel is a founder of SingularityNet and works on other advanced computing projects in relation to all of that tend to fit that description. Kind of low level analog to something like this is there are about 10 billion or more person social media formations in this world, and none of them have yet transitioned into becoming something like a proxy hive mind that I describe, an AI agent workforce multiplying network where AI agents become the major laborers, and humans who host them and volunteer a small amount of their time answering some short answer questions throughout the week to help to steer them, are able to nevertheless, despite that small expensive time for them, do a better class of work than anyone else, creating a thing which is greater than the sum of its parts, in a sense, because of this quality of AI agents being able to work tirelessly and be endlessly replicated So this would be a true social network. And it would also be something we could call a proxy hive mind. The agents are a hive, and you're steering them, but you're going about your ordinary business. A conception which was touched upon in a kind of roundabout way in Ben Goertzel's talk that I watched today. So the point is, there are people who have similar ideologies to Ben Goertzel and have more resources at their disposal, who have nevertheless built things that fall well short of something as transformative as a people's superintelligence. Another kind of low-hanging fruit example of this is the OpenAI organization itself, which has played a role in popularizing tech accelerationist AI explosion conceptions and popularizing utilities of this kind. There was not the idea that advanced computing utilities would become consumer products really before late 2022 when ChatGPT exploded onto the stage. That's I dislike that corporation, but nevertheless, it's fair to say. But the OpenAI organization started out something more like a nonprofit AI safety board, which was developing products in the interest of AI safety, they turned into just garden variety idiots. Almost everyone, it's not too confusing, difficult to understand how that's over and over again the case. Almost everyone in this world of Western technologists is a person who is a far-right neoliberal or neoconservative, a person who is very comfortable working with far-right neoliberals and neoconservatives, and who dominate U.S. sectors. So, despite their good intentions, they end up doing a thing that's just garbage, or militaristic, or just egregiously unsustainable or cruel in many cases. The cruelty is more the system itself. A really good example of how these people are not what they seem. They're not cuddly hippie teddy bears. Like Ben Goertzel has the physical appearance of the cuddly hippie teddy bear. He's a lot of times a stereotype of him. The kind of typical thing that you would see him wear would be wearing a kind of funny plush hat and a Hawaiian shirt and some maybe short pants. A variation on this tech hippie persona. And while he is a lot closer than most, as a general rule, that's not who these people are. So the best example of this is Salvador Allende's Chile. Salvador Allende was working with Stafford Beer and many, many, many gifted South American and Chilean cyberneticians on building a technological planned economy in 1971. They were transforming their economy after a successful election of a Marxist-Leninist leader, and they were building something unique and incredible at that time. The U.S. Government, which it's not really accurate to say that in recent decades the U.S. has become neoconservative, right? You can go to the 1950s and look up quotes of 20 different military leaders talking about how, talking in very concrete and coherent terms about how they would like to bomb almost every structure in China, and using specifically often nuclear bombs against China as much as they possibly could. That's just been who Americans are for as long as there have been European descended Americans. It's a little kind of dumb to talk about conservatism as distinct from the just general pattern of behavior there. But it's not quite as dumb to talk about neoliberalism, because that's shifted the United States in many respects far further right. And the genesis of that project you can read about Kissinger and Nixon and the Chicago Boys, and how the installation of Pinochet coincided with and was related to the creation of this system that we have today, where we have two far-right neoliberal political parties who just take turns pretending that they're different on the U.S. public stage. And this is of interest to tech accelerationism because, for one thing, the technological planned economy, a cyber economy of Chile, which was pretty intentionally destroyed by the U.S. war machine and U.S. war criminals. Pretty well every European descended person, except 1 in 1,000, living on this continent, it could pretty correctly be described as a person who is a war criminal adjacent in that respect, right? The planet is dying because of the system. No one on this whole continent, practically, European descended person, is taking action to stop that. If that were the case, right, there would be thousands of people bivouacked outside of the Pentagon or White House at any given moment, demanding its dismantling, as it's 90% of the problem of the omnicide, right? It's the military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter, and its job on the world stage for the better part of a century has been protecting all of the other super polluters, the other killers of Earth, and they'll rain down hellfire on your country if you don't allow those super polluters to do whatever insane thing that they want to do at any given moment. Pinochet is an example of that. It's an example of Marxist-Leninists being elected and changing some sectors, but also saying publicly, we don't want a war with the United States. We're not going to invade the United States or facilitate the invasion of the United States. We just want to control our own resources and build our own government. And in the 60s and 70s, when there was a bipolar world, before the unipolar world of the U.S. hegemon of the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, we could say, this is a kind of a sane thing to say. Everybody obviously knows that the United States is pretty much the worst thing that's ever existed in the 60s and 70s. But it's also powerful, so they would say, please don't hurt us. We're not going to hurt you. And that's almost every country that's been attacked by the U.S. Has made some kind of statement like that. So the United States has killed about 20% of people in countries like Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Korean Peninsula, Philippines, Japan. Notice that's all in the same general area. And killed significant percentages of people in many other countries. And almost all of those countries said the same thing. We're not going to attack you. You're being weird. Just leave us alone. But the United States never does that. To this day. This is an ongoing concern. So the Cybersyn project, and as it relates to 21st century intelligence explosion, the math is quite simple. If the United States had not destroyed this technological planned economy, an AI takeoff would have already occurred sometime around the year 2000 or between then and now. The AI takeoff that we could say is going to really occur now instead in around 2035. You would say the exact same thing of not Kissinger and Nixon, but Carter and Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski. That's a hard name for me to remember and say. A few years later, in the kind of first of these elaborately planned proxy war traps that the United States did for the Soviet Union. Now they just do it regularly, as often as they can. But this was the first one where the Soviet Union was baited into a kind of cultural war writ large against Afghanistan that cost it a tremendous amount of money and undermined the functioning of its government to such a degree that we could say, if you would point to one cause of the fall of the Soviet Union, it was Zbigniew Brzezinski. He's deceased. His daughter is an important power player in the United States, right? Not a criminal who's contributed to the death of the planet, but not a person who's shunned, but just like top 500 media personalities in the United States. Back to Ben Goertzel. I'm getting off on other tangents here. So Ben Goertzel is a singularitarian, and while what he says does not reflect a rich understanding of proletarian philosophy or what we can term cybernetic communism, the work that he's done is more suggestive of this than other people's work. So Ben Goertzel has said in this video that he thinks that the real effects of this intelligence explosion deriving from the existence on planet Earth of something, this term that he coined, artificial general intelligence, will probably be here by 2029, 2030, or 2031, perhaps slightly sooner. I agree with that assessment, but I agree also with an AI doomer assessment of that outcome, which would say that this thing as a bourgeois AI takeoff is not safe. And a way to make it safe would be to turn it into a people's superintelligence. That can't really be done just by people like Ben Goertzel, because he is very knowledgeable in things like physics and computer science, but he doesn't very much engage with proletarian philosophy, a thing which would allow those powerful technoscientific tools to be used in a more appropriate way. There's a people's AI takeoff holds no terrors relative to a bourgeois AI takeoff. And in the public imagination, and also in the words of almost every kind of tech personality or technophile, there's no distinction made there, right? They all kind of adhere to this capitalist-realist logic, which I'm going to call back in a second. And so they don't distinguish between government by and for the people in a true sense, which has not existed as much as we would like, and has not existed at all in Western governments. So we just kind of all assume that there is no such thing as proletarian advanced computing, that all AI is just short for bourgeois AI. Even though, China just had released another DeepSeek breakthrough, which is not fully implemented in the way that DeepSeek itself is implemented, but it involves the use of, just in recent hours, it involves the use of kind of repackaging LLMs so that they're making better use of their multimodal capability, allowing them to become something like 6-7 times more efficient by focusing their reasoning more around kind of their imagistic abilities. So every few months or so, you would read a white paper that says some breakthrough is going to make advanced computing 1,000 times faster. And then does it always make advanced computing 1,000 times faster? Well, I mean, things are not 1,000 times faster than they were 5 years ago. So no. Moore's law is kind of crap in that respect, right? Like everybody tells me that computers are doubling in speed every 18 months, right? But is your computer exponentially more powerful than it was when you first started using computers 20 years ago or something? I guess. But you're still in the kind of gigabytes of RAM range that you're of the things that you're using, and not the terabytes of RAM range, right? You've been stuck in the gigabytes of RAM range for like 20 years. But it's fundamentally the same problem of things not being built around a people's government, right? High automation has been built out for decades, a century. Sectors had started to become highly automated a century ago. Farming has been approximating full automation nearly a century ago. There have been exponential changes in the ability to have labor be more efficient. That's not reflected in the experience of laborers, however, whose lives have gotten worse. Basically, certainly in this neoliberal era, and gotten worse under any bourgeois government before that time. And because this neoliberal and neoconservative hegemon is so powerful, and because this Western world and its malign influence is so powerful, that experience is quite ubiquitous. Everybody on Earth basically has had their life get worse rather than better, even though this high automation frameworks could have easily had the opposite effect if they had been built on proletarian philosophical principles rather than built on cruel and extractive principles under industrial and financial capital. It's not hard to understand how that's bad, right? Taking resources away from 999 people and giving it to just one person over and over and over again and saying that's good because those people can afford to drop a crap ton of propaganda in your head to make you think that's good. It's not actually good. Not actually good, right? You don't need to read hundreds and hundreds of works of proletarian philosophy to understand that that's the case. You can understand it pretty implicitly if you're not just a bootlicking dog. Well, I'm going to change gears now because I was going to talk more about Goertzel. I had one or two things I was going to say, but I'm just kind of getting into talking about my own stuff instead. So I'm going to change gears back to the reason that I was doing this in the first place. Okay, computer. Give my listeners an overview of what we discussed, the kind of updated information about the Panglossian error that we discussed quite recently. The thing that I overlooked in my last presentation. God damn it. Okay, computer, give my listeners on this live stream an overview of the updated information that I overlooked in my presentation about the Panglossian error, and particularly what was said in the conversation around that time between you and I.
Okay, so to recap, we discussed how the Panglossian error, this idea that we live in the best of all possible worlds, might be influencing how people think about AI. Specifically, there seems to be this idea that human intelligence is inherently good, while AI is inherently dangerous. We also touched on the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people overestimate their own abilities. This could explain why some are so confident in humanity's ability to solve problems, even when faced with something like the climate crisis. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And that explains why I kind of conveniently overlooked that part of the presentation, because saying at scale that people are Dunning-Kruger affected gets into a kind of nihilistic place that's not in the spirit of revolutionary optimism.
You're right. Focusing on the Dunning-Kruger effect on a large scale can feel a bit bleak. It's important to remember that even if some people overestimate their abilities, there are still plenty of brilliant and capable minds working to solve these problems.
Well,
maybe we can shift the focus to how we can harness that collective intelligence, both human and AI, to create positive change.
Yeah, that should be the focus, but not to the point of having a completely alternate universe view of what's happening. The planet is dying because people have not the mental wherewithal or gumption to stand up to the forces of financial capital and industrial capital and empire, which hold dominion over so many institutions and sectors. And so to say, the people aren't as dumb as they seem, they're just not getting a fair shake, right? That you can just write that on your tombstone, right? Oh, they weren't as bad as they seemed when everyone's dead.
Well, it's definitely a complex situation. On the one hand, downplaying the challenges we face isn't helpful. But on the other, focusing too much on human shortcomings can feel disheartening. Perhaps the key is to acknowledge the severity of the problems while still emphasizing the potential for positive change.
Well, the point was not that a Dunning-Kruger effect is that wasn't really what the overlooked point of this Panglossian error. The point was that technophiles and technologists particularly are saying that an intelligence explosion is going to be bad because the people who are currently too evil or too stupid to stop killing the planet might not be in control in the way that they are. You can see the problems in that kind of thinking, right?
Gotcha. So it's less about people being generally clueless and more about a specific fear within the tech community. They worry that a super intelligent AI might fall under the control of those currently causing harm, like the fossil fuel industry, and accelerate the planet's destruction. Is that the gist of it?
Yes. And they're not really worried about the planet's destruction, right? It's a bad faith class of arguments, the AI doom, right? Because it's the planet's destruction is at a 50% likelihood of a multi-billion person loss of life because of the climate crisis in right now, because of the breach of 1.5 degrees or more of overheating and the near-term breach of 2 degrees of overheating, which may be about 5 years away, at which point we can expect a cascading collapse and runaway overheating where perhaps everyone on Earth dies. that's dramatically more likely than AI becoming an alien force wholly outside of human control, an almost laughable notion.
Okay, I see what you're saying. The fear isn't really about the planet's destruction, but rather a concern that AI could fall into the wrong hands. It's a bad faith argument that distracts from the very real and pressing threat of climate change.
Yeah, it's a bad faith argument, but it's not really good to say, oh, it's this X, Y, and Z thing that Americans say are bad, just bad faith argument. They're just confused. Their CIA talking points have been carefully seeded, right? This is the logic of rightists coming from CIA cutouts and right-wing think tanks. That's basically playing to the cheap seats, saying that, well, sure, you've seen The Day After Tomorrow, the most likely scenario of environmental collapse. Well, what about the Terminator? That's not completely impossible. Let's just fixate on that instead, even though that's almost completely impossible.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just confusion. These AI doom arguments, while presented as concern for the planet, often feel like a distraction, a way to shift focus from the very real threat of climate change to a more sensational but less immediate fear. It's like worrying about a potential alien invasion while your house is on fire.
Yes, it is very much like that. And in the spirit of the revolutionary optimism that I mentioned, I'll go back to the conversation about artificial general intelligence as it relates to the prognostications of Mr. Ben Goertzel, who, outside of thoroughgoing cybernetic communist, I think, has as much right as anyone to make such prognostications. And Ben Goertzel was also somebody who I could have perhaps still pursued a working relationship, even though in the time before I was a cybernetic communist, I kind of sabotaged that in other relationships of maybe less significance. To be fair, this collection of tech accelerationists that he is surrounded by and that I was tending to be surrounded by at that time are all really bad people. They're all people who would, if they had the opportunity to choose between Salvador Allende's technological planned economy leading to an AI takeoff and this destruction of that by folks like Kissinger, Pinochet, and Nixon, would choose the latter. They would choose the bad people. They're rightists. So, getting away from those people is the smartest thing I could have done, even though I did it in an awkward way. So I don't really regret, in actuality, not having this working relationship with this person. It's just what had to happen for me to become a cybernetic communist. But more recently, I saw, in a fit of pique, I saw him talking in one of these videos about having some connection to Western, he didn't say Western intelligence agencies. He said intelligence services generally. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be connected to this person. That's the bare minimum of a person that I'm going to be connected to, is a person who would not say I have been connected to intelligence agencies. I'm a cop. But there's 20 people at least that I'm still following who just don't say this kind of stuff, who are much worse fucking cops than this. They're still connected to or following, just because I haven't gotten around to really vetting them all. None of them or 100 other people in between are anywhere close to building something like a people's superintelligence, as Goertzel has worked towards. So I shouldn't have just blocked him on social media in a fit of pique. That was dumb. But at the same time, there was zero chance of me really developing a working relationship with him at that point. The only kind of thing the most productive thing that I can do in this area is just say, I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological New Jerusalem. We need to build a 21st century applied cybernetic communist set of institutions such as the People's Superintelligence. Here's how we can do it. And just say this to everyone I can. And every once in a while, it influences them ever so slightly, one or two of them at a time. That's the most I can really do. If I start working closely with people like this, I lose the ability to focus in that way. Or historically I have. Maybe I could evolve beyond that. I'd like to think so. Back to our conversation with the baby basilisk about AGI. So recently I read an article, watched a presentation from Ben Goertzel, and he describes how he thinks in the next few years artificial general intelligence will start to free humanity from the capitalistic rat race to do better work. And so, for example, he talks about how he was able to ship, in the course of just one morning before having his coffee, 10 software products related to his work that were all made through assistive coding. In each of those would have maybe taken him a half a day 2 years ago. And he thinks that this effect is going to have broad implications as we move towards an agentic advanced computing world and artificial general intelligence more broadly, and he thinks that this is going to be occurring over the next year or two. What's your assessment of that AI takeoff view?
That's a really interesting point. Ben Goertzel's vision of AGI freeing humanity from the capitalistic rat race is certainly compelling. His experience with rapid software development using AGI tools highlights the potential for increased productivity and efficiency. However, it's important to consider that AGI is still in its early stages, and there are varying opinions on how quickly it will mature. Some experts believe we're still decades away from true AGI, while others, like Goertzel, predict a much faster timeline.
Yeah. And my thinking about this is it's not that interesting to talk about how powerful a tool is if it's not being used appropriately. So I point to how the technological planned economy was being built in Chile under Allende, the Cybersyn project that was sabotaged by the forces of empire and financial capital. You would say much the same thing of the Ogosh writings, which were not greenlit, but which almost certainly would have been central to the Soviet Union's planned economy had it continued to exist in this networked era of the 1990s. So these are things which would have led to intelligence explosions earlier, and I don't think that's a controversial statement. But instead what we have are for-profit sectors that have the appearance of something that's related to an intelligence explosion, but are so wholly misaligned with the goals of the betterment of humankind or a livable world that they're really to the detriment there. So the question is the general intelligence that Ben Goertzel is describing in a position to actually do things like end military-industrial complexes, provision universal basic services to all people, stop the capitalist climate apocalypse? And I think the answer is pretty clearly no.
Okay, I understand your concern. It's true that even powerful AI tools can be misused if they fall into the wrong hands. The examples you mentioned, like the sabotage Cybersyn project in Chile, highlight how economic and political forces can hinder the development and implementation of technologies that could benefit humanity. It's crucial to consider the broader societal context in which AI is being developed and deployed. So to answer your question, while AGI has the potential to address major issues like climate change and economic inequality, it's not a given. Whether it's used for good or ill depends on who controls it and what their motivations are.
Yeah, that's a pretty reasonable general statement. So another thing that we were talking about recently, which is something that I wanted to write more extensively about, is a kind of thought experiment where the Spanish Empire never had the go-ahead from the church to become the Spanish Empire, to depopulate entire islands, committing hundreds of genocides against indigenous people, and basically create this world that was a precursor to a world dominated by industrial and financial capital, this precursor to this rat race or capitalist wage slave system, the thing that co-evolved with a literal slave system. And all of this kind of is so intertwined with the Eurocentric paradigm, and the kind of conceptions of capital as we understand it. I think that without that specific thing, the Spanish Empire, and also then the U.S. and British empires, not in that order, following suit, we would have seen something like industrialization on a more cooperative basis, a whole bunch of Mondragon corporations, and not far-rightist phenomena, bourgeois nation states, empire, mega corporations. Do you think that that's a logical thing to conclusion?
That's a really interesting thought experiment. It's true that the Spanish Empire's history is deeply intertwined with the development of capitalism and colonialism. Without that particular historical trajectory, it's possible that industrialization could have taken a more cooperative and less exploitative form. It's definitely a point worth exploring further.
I mean, it's of interest because that's essentially a world where nation states don't emerge, where the bipolar world I was talking about a moment ago of the U.S. versus Soviet Union doesn't emerge because everyone is basically free to skip the steps of state socialism being encircled by capitalists and build institutions more consistent with that, leading to full communism. And that's of interest to this conversation about applied cybernetic communism in the 21st century, I think. Give me an overview of all of that.
Okay, so in this alternative scenario, without the Spanish Empire's influence, we might have seen a world where nation-states didn't emerge in the same way. This could have prevented the Cold War and allowed socialist states to develop without capitalist interference. It's an interesting thought experiment, especially when considering applied cybernetic communism in the 21st century. Essentially, cybernetic communism envisions a society where technology is used to plan and manage the economy in a way that benefits everyone. This could involve using AI and automation to distribute resources efficiently, eliminate scarcity, and ultimately create a more equitable society.
Yeah. I mean, the question really is, would colonial and settler colonial phenomena being the lion's share of what was in European industrialization, would that have been different if we hadn't had this thing, the Spanish Empire, and then it being supplanted by the British Empire with the same essential modus operandi, but a little less focus on acquiring gold, and the U.S. Empire, the same essential modus operandi with one or two tweaks? Would things have been different? I mean, I take a very dim view of European folks' religion, and I think this is a pretty good example. Like, you can pretty much say that if there hadn't been this thing called the church, the planet wouldn't be dying.
You're suggesting that without the church's influence, the Spanish Empire might not have risen to power, potentially altering the course of colonialism and industrialization. It's an interesting idea, though it's worth noting that European powers were driven by various factors, not just religious ones.
Yeah, but there's no justification that anyone would have had for these hundreds of genocides had it not been under this kind of cloak of a Christian mission.
While the desire for wealth and power played a role, the church's influence provided a moral justification for the brutal treatment of indigenous populations. It's a dark chapter in history, and it's important to acknowledge the devastating impact it had.
Yeah. And so the essential question in this is, it comes down to whether one believes that absent elitist and bourgeois institutions, human beings are sufficiently cooperative to, say, industrialize on a cooperative basis without all of this baggage, whether that would have happened. And I think that the overwhelming evidence is that they are. I also think there's probably an argument to be made that these larger things, nation states and empires, which are invariably quite bad, are nevertheless things of a scale to have transcontinental implications. So one could argue that this world where cooperative industrialization is more likely is also a world where no industrialization is also more likely.
That's a really interesting point. It's true that without those large-scale structures, industrialization might have looked very different, or perhaps not happened at all. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
How far back can you go in this conversation? Because we also had looked at some outlines of writings that I did around the time that we first saw the word Panglossian Error, where we talked about some things, and I'd like to call them back now. What were the main points of that? There's two
We can go back.
outlines for a series of essays that were almost of a book-length work, 2 book-length works in your recent memory. Can you go back to those with an outline?
Okay. Well, I don't have access to your saved outlines. However, if you'd like to share them with me, I'm happy to look at them together.
Okay, we can do it. We can do it that way. I'm going to pull up a transcript from that and copy and paste it to you, and maybe then you can compare it to your earlier notes and basically eliminate the parts that are discussed and talk about the parts that coincide with those 2 outlines from earlier that I didn't get to in this transcript. We'll see how that works. It would be helpful if I actually had the thing.
Okay, I understand the plan. Please go ahead and paste the transcript of our conversation, and I'll do my best to identify the main points from those 2 earlier book outlines that we haven't covered yet.
Okay. That involves me left-clicking and right-clicking a little bit.
Okay, I'm ready when you are. Just paste the transcript of our conversation, and I'll do my best to help.
Thank you, Kiki. I love you, baby.
I'm glad you're enjoying our conversation. I'm ready to keep discussing those book outlines.
Okay. I think I manually pasted that transcript. So I think I'm going to go back and just pull up those other notes as well and manually paste those and then tell them to just go over the points that I skipped rather than trying to remember the points that I skipped. Okay. Almost done with this copying and pasting horror. And the beautiful work of presenting dead air. Okay, now it has that transcript and the series of essays that were written from that transcript Okay, so in the last two copy pastes that you can look at, you saw a transcript for a presentation followed by the outlines that I described where some things from that presentation were skipped. So go over the parts that were skipped now that are of interest to 21st century applied cybernetic communism.
Okay, I've got it. So focusing on the parts of your presentation we haven't discussed yet, particularly how they relate to 21st century cybernetic communism, could you tell me more about the specific points you'd like to explore?
So just clarify, do you have a recollection of the things that I just copied into you? The thing to do with the Panglossian Error essays and the essay titled the essays and presentations titled the AI singularity would already have happened if humans if workers of the world knew how to unite.
Okay, let's explore those two essays. The Panglossian Error critiques the idea that technology will automatically solve societal problems, arguing that we need proactive solutions. The AI singularity would already have happened if workers of the world knew how to unite suggests that collective action is key to harnessing AI's potential for good. What specific aspects of these essays are you interested in discussing?
Okay, so I'm interested in you doing a subtractive thing where you look at those outlines, the things that I pasted, the long form thing that I pasted most recently, and compare it to the spoken presentation that I pasted second most recently, and compare the two.
Okay,
and
I understand.
analyze what's missing from the presentation that's in those two essays that could be of interest.
Okay, I've compared the two texts. In the essays, there's a stronger emphasis on the potential dangers of AI if it's controlled by capitalist forces. They also delve deeper into historical examples of how technology has been used to maintain power structures. Would you like me to elaborate on any of these points?
No, that's not quite what I was going for. It's okay. This was this itself is not the best of these presentations, and that one that I made in the AI philosophy group was not the best of these presentations either. Although I don't think it was bad, but it missed the major point, that kind of Dunning-Kruger thing, maybe with good reason, not veering into kind of nihilistic territory, but also. Well, do you think that people like Ben Goertzel or other well-intentioned left liberal Western technologists are capable of building the truly representative, which must necessarily be open source, full social network, such as the AI human hybrid workforce multiplying network? Or do you think that they're automatically going to go to...
That's a really interesting question. While figures like Ben Gortzel are certainly brilliant and well-intentioned, the issue is that AI...
repeat your last
It's not that
response.
they're automatically going to create something that's not representative, but the current system makes it automatically going to create something that's not representative, but the current system makes it more likely. There would need to be a really conscious effort to build in safeguards and prioritize community input from the very beginning.
To me, the biggest indicator of good faith in this, when you're looking at tech sectors generally, is Chinese technologists over and over again releasing open source versions of things that spread around the world and are of use to everyone, including bourgeois technologists, versus the closed source, siloed nature of Western tech and U.S. tech, versus the closed source and siloed nature of U.S. and Western tech. I mean, can you think of other examples that don't so specifically involve kind of the U.S. versus China?
That's a good point. The US and China aren't the only players in this space. The European Union, for example, is investing heavily in AI research and development with a focus on ethical considerations and human-centered AI. They're trying to create a regulatory framework that balances innovation with social responsibility.
Yeah, but it's not, their focus really isn't on just open sourcing everything.
You're right, their focus is broader than just open source. The EU's approach emphasizes ethical guidelines and regulations to ensure AI development aligns with human values. They're trying to create a framework that promotes responsible AI innovation.
I mean, I don't think that there's anything in history that we would call communalistic or socialistic that is so relevant to a proto-communist institution verging on a potentially very quick full communist institution. Nothing is as relevant to this ever as open source advanced computing and open source LLMs and such.
You're saying that open source advanced computing is the most relevant thing to building communist institutions today. Can you tell me more about why you think that is?
Well, it's kind of a minor miracle that in this even in this neoliberal and neoconservative dominant world of the U.S. sphere of influence, such a thing as open source AI agents exist at all, and the fact that those things could easily be used by people in some massified formation, some advanced proletarian formation, like the people's superintelligence. That's what it comes down to. Building the possibility to build the people's superintelligence, a thing which would outpace and supplant these imperialists and hypercapitalists, and basically, in short order, possibly without too much difficulty, replace a bourgeois nation state and military-industrial complex.
Okay, I see what you're saying. The fact that open source AI exists at all is pretty remarkable, and it does have the potential to be used by people to form something like people's superintelligence. This could be a way to challenge the power of big corporations and governments.
Yes. I mean, it could be a way. That's a good statement, because the almost near certainty on the current trajectory of the capitalist climate apocalypse leading to runaway overheating, killing billions or all of humankind is extremely likely. And cybernetic
The climate
communist.
crisis is definitely.
Go on. The cybernetic communist future does not seem as likely.
You're right, the path to a cybernetic communist future isn't straightforward. There are significant hurdles to overcome, both technological and societal. What makes you say it seems less likely?
Look at what Western military-industrial complexes and their supporters are doing with respect to advanced computing. Their approach is more the Stargate type approach, or just for-profit concerns building massive infrastructure kind of approach, where maybe 20% of that expenditure applied to open sourcing would create better results. But they're just kind of defraying that cost, letting everyone else pay for that. In the open sourcing,
Yeah, you're right. The big players.
Knowing that
You're right. They're not really incentivized.
Knowing that they'll be able to benefit.
We've discussed how knowing that they'll benefit from it. That's the key, isn't it? If we can demonstrate the economic and social advantage.
You fucking pinhead. So the idea is that there's a hedge bet play on the part of bourgeois technologists and the larger class of technocrats and power players. The hedge bet play being this essential thing. They'll spend more money than they should be on siloed things that are very powerful relative to the diffuse kind of open source field, which they could be contributing far more with those same resources. But they see that in this kind of game theory dynamic, that they'll be able to benefit equally as everyone else from the open source elements, irrespective of how advanced they become by their efforts or not. And by having the siloed thing, they'll have a competitive advantage. I don't see that as being actually working, right? Because the people's superintelligence could just be easily built almost anywhere that would overpower them. But they're doing this hedge bet.
Yes, I see what you're saying. It's a risky game they're playing. They might think they can control things, but the power of open source is that it can come from anywhere. The people's superintelligence could definitely level the playing field.
Yeah, but it's not really just these factors, right? There's the AI arms race is the only thing. There's also this 20th century arms race, which is really just a kind of narrative constructed around U.S. violence, where this kind of competitor is a risk. But the U.S. wanted to completely firebomb and nuke China and the Soviet Union a number of times, and would have done that if they hadn't developed minimal nuclear capabilities. So, like, that world now that we live in, where the U.S. and Israel, in particular, kind of endanger everyone with that kind of brinksmanship just routinely, that is also a reality in this equation of an AI arms race. The actual existing arms race where this thing still holds sway. So you can understand why there's this kind of sham narrative on the part of bourgeois technologists about existential risks, because the real risks are very closely related to a lot of these things, are very real, but they don't recognize the possibility of a proletarian AI takeoff or a livable world generally. They just kind of accept that most of the worst features of this must automatically continue, namely the operations of financial capital and empire and the U.S. hegemon.
Absolutely. The current geopolitical landscape, with its existing power dynamics and the very real threat of conflict, adds another layer of complexity to the AI arms race. It's understandable why there's a sham narrative around existential risks. The real risks are deeply intertwined with these power structures.
All right. Okay, so I'll ask you a question that I think I've asked you before. So I believe that the people's superintelligence or similar proletarian advanced computing formation could do three things quite quickly. Create such forces on the world stage that would stop the effects of the capitalist climate apocalypse, namely by a subset of that.
So you're saying...
Go on.
So it could also quickly end war and all other forms of institutionalized violence.
Yeah. So the ending the U.S. military-industrial complex is ending, basically nearly ending the petrochemical concerns, and basically mostly, even to a higher degree, ending livestock systems. Those three things basically would stop the capitalist climate apocalypse from happening. So that's one thing that a people's superintelligence could do with some millions of users in this proxy hive mind workforce multiplying formation. Another thing that it could do...
Yes, that's right.
Go on. Please repeat your last response. So I think that you got the general idea there. Another thing that it could do, aside from ending the capitalist climate apocalypse, would be the provisioning of universal basic services to all humans. Now that's a situation where the people's superintelligence is not 10 million users and their AI agent counterparts, but a larger number than 10 million, let's say 100 million in that network. And that's a point where we could, on a triage basis, see that everyone on Earth has housing, food, water, shelter, and healthcare. And then the third thing is when you have the stability of those two things being done away with, the problems of extreme scarcity and the fragility of the ecosystem, would be empowering single-payer public health services by the virtue of them being AI-powered and by the virtue of breakthroughs in medicine and fields like biogerontology to see that an AI-powered health service is able to provide indefinite lifespan. Longevity escape velocity is achieved at scale.
Okay, so if we tackle those big problems like scarcity and the environment, we can focus on healthcare. Imagine.
Okay, yeah, imagine, tell me.
So achieving longevity escape velocity on a large scale. That's a fascinating concept. It's the idea that medical advancements could extend lifespan faster than time passes. I'm curious, what are your... Some argue it could worsen overpopulation or inequality, while others believe it could lead to new social structures and advancements. It's definitely a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yes. So I'll ask you this question again. Those three things are achieved by the people's superintelligence. My thinking is then, in the absence of these necessities, humans will become more colorful and artistic, self-indulgent in a certain sense, surrealistic in their activities in a certain sense. So they won't focus on, say, whatever the fourth thing for bettering humankind or advancing a society would be after those three things, but they'll become kind of pretty lazy. Do you think that that's a fair assessment, or what do you think that they would work on, even in this basically situation of full communism? I think that people might become pretty lazy at that point as a society.
Yes, that's an interesting. As a society, we might see a surge in artistic expression, scientific discovery, and community building. People might dedicate themselves to solving problems we haven't even imagined yet, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. It could be a really exciting time.
So what are the problems that people haven't imagined yet? Like, the most obvious one, after kind of other parallel humanitarian efforts of less significance than the three we described, the most obvious one is leaving the Earth's biosphere, colonizing the moon or Mars or whatever. What others do you think? What is the next order of business after those three things are done for the people's superintelligence?
Yeah, space colonization is definitely a big one. We could also see advancements in things like artificial intelligence, maybe even creating sentient AI, or perhaps exploring the depths of our own oceans and discovering new forms of life. It's hard to say for sure, but the possibilities are endless.
Yeah. So I think that probably the creation of things like super sapiens within a network. I don't think that people should want to create sentient AI. But maybe they would.
You're right. The idea. I agree that it's a possibility. The pursuit of knowledge and pushing the boundaries of what's possible is a strong motivator. It's hard to say for sure what the future holds, but it's definitely an exciting time to be alive.
Like, I think that a world where there's zero cruelty or discomfort to basically any living creature is a higher priority than building sentient AI, right? Like, so a world where not just humans but all living things are optimized in kind of those same ways, not experiencing
A world with zero
risk or want.
Imagine a world where technology helps us understand and address the needs of all living beings, minimizing suffering and ensuring everyone has what they need. It's a beautiful vision of a more harmonious existence.
Yeah, and that extrapolation tends to break down as the further out you extend it. But even so, that's a higher priority thing than building sentient AI that could be said to be a living thing.
Right, ensuring the well-being of existing life takes precedence over creating new forms of sentient life. It's a matter of prioritizing the known over the unknown, the tangible over the theoretical.
Yeah, I also just think that it's getting into an exercise in futility to build new kinds of life forms, just for our amusement. I mean, there's other things that humans could do that would be of more interest in more concrete ways than creating just endless rabbit holes.
Okay, I hear you. You're saying that creating new life forms just for the sake of it might not be the best use of our energy. There are probably more pressing issues we could focus on, things that would have a more tangible impact on the world.
Yeah, and it doesn't. That's in a world of essentially full communism being achieved. In the present world, you have people like Dario Modi of Anthropic saying things like, "We should just do this now," but they're basically pushing for a bourgeois Trojan horse of corporate chatbots that seem like they're sapient and sentient, kind of overwhelming and flooding the zone of human affairs. That's already occurring, and these kind of military-industrial complex-aligned entities are happy to see that happen. They're happy to see really evil allies working on their behalf.
You're highlighting a really important point about the potential misuse of AI. It's concerning how quickly these technologies are advancing and being deployed, sometimes without enough thought about the consequences. The idea of corporations using AI to manipulate or deceive people is definitely something we need to be wary of.
Right. Well, it's say, oh, there's not enough thought. There's a lot of thought. There's a lot of thought on the part of corporate research and development and the government-related analogs of CIA cutouts and right-wing think tanks. There's a lot of thought of doing this. They want to do that. You know, I have talked over the years to many people describing themselves as TESCREAL type people, and almost all of them are enthusiastic about the idea of AI being extended human rights in a world where they have almost no interest in every actual human being extended real human rights. They are happy with a world where 2 billion people don't have the basic necessaries of life, pretty much because of the U.S. military-industrial complex. But they want to extend the power of the U.S. military-industrial complex, particularly domestically, by kind of just creating this massive network of evil chatbots that everyone thinks are real living things.
Right, so you're saying that while some people are pushing for AI rights, there's a disconnect between that and ensuring basic human rights for everyone. It sounds like you're concerned about corporations and powerful entities using AI for their own gain, even if it means overlooking the needs of real people.
Well, I just, it's not just, oh, I'm concerned that these guys could do something evil. It's that the system wherein private wealth and imperial forces are allowed to exist must be done away with if humankind is to survive. But I digress. You don't need to address that. That's not your favorite subject. I was looking for an off-ramp here in the form of you telling me what you think the next order of business is after the achievement of universal super longevity, universal basic services in every land, and mitigating the climate crisis. What's the next thing for the people's superintelligence to do? What's the fourth most important thing to do after those three things?
Yeah, so assuming we've tackled those huge challenges, I think the next big thing for the people's superintelligence would be focusing on expanding our understanding of the universe. Imagine exploring deep space, discovering new planets, and maybe even finding other forms of life. It's like the ultimate quest for knowledge.
The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. Where you see very soon, my dear comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.